ready to get started?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll just turn it to you, Martha. All right. Ready? All right. Good evening. It's my pleasure to call the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting on January 12th, 2023 to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now I will turn it to our district's business manager, Ms. Martha Q, to walk us through the agenda.
We don't have a long agenda tonight, but we'll start off as we usually do with construction updates. Mr. Matthews.
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right, well, we'll get started. Not a lot for this evening, but basically we're at the point now. We'll start with Linwood as usual. Pretty much everybody's been paid. Punch list work is all complete. So at this point, we're down to just getting the final paperwork done with the county, which is just about wrapped up. We actually just sent it yesterday to Martha for district signature. And then we just need a final inspection from them. So that will really close out Linwood. There was one or two minor change orders left with some additional card reader doors, which was finally completed this week as well, which is great. So really, project is essentially closed at this point. You can see the contingency balance that's left, $875,000 that the district can decide how to use. But really, we're essentially done. So, which is great news, finally. Any questions on Linwood? All right, moving on.
The discussion on Linwood has finally got to the point where it's so brief.
It feels like it's been a long
Yeah.
time. It does feel like it's been a long time.
Yeah, we were able to show it off last month to Representative Vitale and gave him a tour, and yeah, everything is looking really good, and the students are thoroughly enjoying the building.
Yeah, they are.
Yes, some of our board members can attest.
Yeah, that's one. It really turned out well. All right, so moving on, high school phase one, this has really just been a placeholder the last few months. It's essentially been closed out. So it's really, the contingency was moved to phase two, and there's nothing left to complete at this point at the, for the phase one project, other than closing out the MPDES permit, which is part of high school phase two construction. It was all done as one permit. So you can see here for high school phase two, again, we're pretty much just about closed out. There's a few straggling items. The chiller fence, which we're supposed to have this month, supposedly. The Coopertown fence is showing up, and this is all part of the same order. It's all the same fencing. So word on the street is, but until we get it, I see it on site, I'll believe it. So that's one of the few straggling items. The electrician has one change order that they'll be working on that was approved last month to close out the fitness center. So that should be done in the next 2 weeks. And then really, we're just waiting on some final closeout paperwork. 2 of the contractors are already closed out, final build. They've already submitted everything. So we're very close. I would anticipate in the next month, most of the project should be closed out. And you can see there is a little bit of contingency left, $50,000, and I'll be speaking to a recommendation that we have this evening as well. And there's a very small allowance budget that's left that will, for the electrician, that will go unused and will be credited back to the district. So we do have this evening, so one of the items, you know, in hindsight, we probably should have just included it early on, but as you know, at Linwood, we had a commissioning agent that checks the HVAC and electrical systems to make sure they're functioning properly. Linwood was a far more complicated system, but for the high school, after sitting down with JR and Martha and going through it, we received a proposal from the Stonehouse Group that had done the commissioning, HVAC commissioning at Linwood, and we really feel it's important now that both projects are done, go back through, check these systems, make sure they're functioning properly. It is amazing how complicated of computer systems they are. So they really run through it and they say, okay, they trick the system into all these things and say, is it functioning the way it should? Which is very important. So Tonight, we have a recommendation for the Stonehouse Group to do that work and go through both Phase 1 and Phase 2 for a not to exceed of $19,950. So that's one of the recommendations for the board meeting next week.
And so could I just ask that, so it sounds like that's kind of like an audit of how the system's functioning.
It's exactly what it is.
Is that being done like within the window of the warranty? So if there's issues, we can?
Yes, so that's part of the reason why we want to do it. So phase 1, some of the items are out of warranty, and that's why in hindsight, we maybe should have done it a little sooner. But the Phase 2 is still within warranty, so they'll do these, run through these tests this winter during the heating season, and then they'll come back in the summer and do, in June or July on a hot day, make sure the air conditioning is working properly. So they'll do that for both Phase 1 and Phase 2. Any other questions on the high school Phase 2? And as I said, we have to close out the paperwork for the MPDS permit on that as well, which we're very close to at this point. Finally got some final surveying done that we needed. Okay. 1, 2, 4. Chatham Park. So Chatham Park, and Coopertown, essentially the same projects. Phase 1 is pretty much wrapped up. The chillers have been delivered and installed at both schools. There's a little bit of work that will be going on over the next few weeks. Some shrouds, metal shrouds that were covering the pipes in the classrooms were delivered too short last summer, so the new ones are coming in and are getting replaced in the coming weeks. So really, that's it as far as the work that's going on at Chatham.
So with the chillers installed, does that mean like later this spring, the
So-
areas of the building that have the vents, that they would have the AC turned on?
Yeah, so about 60-70% of the building where all the new piping is in and done, half the classrooms or so. So all the gym, cafeteria, that kind of common core, the main front office, and then some of the classrooms on the first floor, they will all have the permanent air conditioning on this spring.
Okay, and then
That-
the work will happen over the summer to finish the rest of it, so by fall.
So
the whole
fall, the building will be
will
100%
Yep.
under full climate control.
Nice.
So, so they've been working through the winter because the old system's on and the new system, so there's been some tweaks and playing around with temperatures. But hopefully by April, that should be gone when the chillers started up.
That's for Chatham now, right?
That's for Chatham.
For Coopertown, it's,
Coopertown's the same, basically the same exact
same
thing.
thing, okay.
A little bit different parts of the building, but for Coopertown, the gym, cafeteria, that whole center core there, kind of from when you walk in the main entrance to the left will pretty much all be the permanent air conditioning system, climate control. And then this summer, from the main office and that single-story wing to the right will be done this summer, and so the air conditioning will be up and running.
Okay.
So in similar fashion to the high school, we'll also have recommendation letters this evening for Stonehouse Group to do both Chatham and Coopertown, the HVAC commissioning, run through all the systems. So the timing will be a little different because we're going to wait until the building is complete, till all systems are complete, because you don't have all the flows until all the other rooms in the building are done. So the idea would be they come back at the end of the summer after everything's complete, check the air conditioning system, and then they'll come back in December, January on a cold day and check the systems for the heating, make sure that's all working properly with the new boilers and whatnot. So their proposal is the same for both buildings. They're almost exactly, it's very similar square footage. So their proposal is a not to exceed of $24,995 for each of the projects. So again, we would recommend proceeding with that work. The one thing I failed to mention, all of these proposals, there was some money in the budget anticipated for additional professional services. Wasn't quite this amount, but that's all covered in the contingency balance that you see in both projects. And you can see for Chatham Park right now, because I can't see that with my eyes, contingencies of $177,000 balance at Chatham Park, and currently at Coopertown, because of a lot of credits that were given back, the contingency is actually more than the $300,000 that was started with There's $445,000 of contingency left in the project. So more than enough to cover the small overrun for the commissioning. One other item we do have this evening, as you know, the roof project was part of Coopertown re-roofing. Phase 2 is scheduled to be done this summer, and we have a recommendation letter in front of you for Mark Sobek, the roof consultant, for their construction administration and the number of inspections that they feel they need for this second phase. It wasn't really included as part of the first phase because it wasn't known at the time how the building was going to be divided up, who the contractors would be, how many inspections, so it was kind of left to the side. It is within the project budget, but for this phase 2 oversight, it's not to exceed of $30,120. So that's for numerous inspections. This roof is going to be a much more complicated renovation than last summer because you're ripping roof off. You have old decking that needs to be inspected. There's going to be repairs, those type of things, where the phase 1 that was done this summer was kind of a very clean, easier, much easier project. So that's the other recommendation that's here this evening for board approval next week. That's it as far as the construction update is concerned, unless there's any other questions.
I'm sorry, just real quick, for the additional services for phase 2, you say that was covered?
Well, it's within the budget. It just
Within the
wasn't
budget.
part of their original approved proposal.
Okay.
Because we weren't sure how many inspections they would have. So we said, rather than guess, let's just wait until the bid process comes, and then they can submit an updated proposal for the amount.
So in general, are things quieter here these next few months until the roof and HVAC system projects ramp up again? at the
Other
end of
than
the
the
year?
few little straggling items, the contractor at Coopertown did ask to start on second shift to do a few things, put up some hangers above the ceiling at night for a few weeks, just to get ahead, because the summers for all of them are usually extremely busy. So it doesn't really interrupt anything. It's just popping ceiling tiles like this. They put them back. Nobody knows they're there the next morning. So we worked that out with Elizabeth and JR, and there was no issue with that. So I think they start that next week. And they'll probably do that just depending on how far they want to go for a couple weeks. So, but there's
And
not much.
Then in the summer, we'll be done with all this, right?
Then this summer, by August, 100% done.
So it's the next phase of our.
Until all the other
Projects,
decisions
yeah.
Projects,
you get
yeah.
to go through.
Ken, I just want to acknowledge, we talked about Linwood, 2 phases of high school, Coopertown, Chatham, and thanks, things have gone
Mhm.
smoothly,
Mhm.
relatively
almost there.
on time, on budget, so, and I know that's not accidental, so thanks
Under
Thank
budget.
you.
for your good
Which is
work.
even better.
In some kind of extraordinary circumstances we had the last couple of years too, so. all
Mhm.
the-
Thing,
all
thing
the-
called COVID might have been interrupted things a little bit, but it worked out.
No, it's nice to get these pretty, straightforward, just tail end of these projects. It's
Yeah.
nice to be on the side of it.
Yep.
No, it is. It's amazing how quickly it goes. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too, thanks.
And for the next item on the agenda, we'll walk through budgeting process 101, kicking off budget season.
Well, I know that everybody's looking forward to this as much as the policy committee activity.
I am.
Thanks for the opportunity. We figured at this point, it's a good spot to do a refresher, to remind you of some of the terminology and just get us set up and started for the 23-24 budget. The first area I wanted to talk about was Act 1 of 2006, and you keep hearing about the Act 1 index. The Act 1 index was created by averaging SAW, the state average weekly wage index, and the ECI, the Federal Employment Cost Index for elementary and secondary schools. They take those 2 indexes for 3 years and average them together and come up with the Act 1 index. so it's an average of averages.
From the past, right, like hindsight, kind of.
So this year's index is the budget year now, 22-23. The index is 3.4%, and for 23-24, the index will be 4.1%. What the index means is this is the top level of tax increase a district can pass without using exceptions or going out for referendum. To apply the percentage, you need to apply it to the current tax rate. So if we currently have 17.6880 mils, we can increase taxes to 18.4132 mils and remain at the index. This would represent approximately $2.9 million in additional tax revenues for the coming year. That's based on the budgeted assessed values. Now, I said that you could have exceptions to Act 1. So I wanted to talk about the exceptions. When Act 1 was first passed, there were several exceptions. Then a few years back, they dropped the exceptions to 4. There is one for grandfathered debt. In fact, Jamie referred to that. Jamie from PFM referred to that the last time he was here, because this exception is only in place as long as the grandfathered debt exists. When the grandfathered debt is finally settled and fully paid out, then that exception goes away. The next exception has to do with electoral debt. This is actually where you have gone out and had voters vote on you allowing debt. So that's what that exception is for, which this district doesn't currently have any of that. The two most common are the special education or the retirement one. In the case of the special education, it looks at 2 prior years of special ed expenditures and then takes the cost of those 2 years and compares them. If there's an increase, it then compares that to your Act 1 index. So in other words, your expenses have to go up at least the index before it can have any effect. So our special ed expenditures across the district would have to go up more than 4.1% for us to be eligible for that particular exception. I did the math, it doesn't apply. The next one, the retirement contribution one, this has to do with the increase in the PSERS rate. When it was originally designed, you take your salaries for both regular salaries and federally funded salaries, and you take 2 years of that and compare them and see whether or not the increase of PSERS based off the salary increase will create an issue where you can get an exception. Except a few years back, the state made the decision that they're going to use your 2011-12 salaries. So the salary amount is fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what this boils down to now is it's a comparison between the increase in PSERS rate and the Act 1 index. If the PSERS rate goes up, in this case more than 4.1%, which please no, then you get an exception. If it doesn't go up more than 4.1%, you don't get an exception. In the coming year, it's actually not feasible. In the coming year, this year that we're just finishing out, it's about a 1% increase compared to the 4.1% Act 1 index. So obviously we're not eligible.
And so that sounds like one that wouldn't just be our district saying we're eligible for, but it would be like all districts or most districts?
Most districts won't be eligible for the PSERS because the rate itself of PSERS
Right.
isn't.
Right, yeah, so it just seems like it's not.
It's a non-existent exception.
district,
The
yeah.
exception still is on the books, but it really is going to be incredibly difficult to use.
If something crazy were to happen where the PSERS rate would go above 4.1%.
For the coming year, it'd have to go up more than 4.1%.
then every district would be permitted to raise taxes by whatever the PSERS.
Right.
Okay.
So the likelihood is.
Not very high, and thank God for that, because yes.
Yes. So having said the two options of the Act 1 index, exceptions we're not eligible for. So that leaves us with the possibility of doing what is called the Act 1 opt-out resolution. This is what you passed last year.
Mm-hmm.
This is basically saying the budget that we create for 23-24 will live inside the 4.1% tax increase, which is realistically where we have to be anyway because we weren't eligible for the exceptions. So I am recommending that the board, at the next board meeting, adopt the opt-out resolution.
That it will not exceed that.
It will not exceed
can be
4.1.
less.
It can be 4.1 or less,
Mhm.
but it can't be more than 4.1. This is a slide I did last year, and I brought it back this year to talk about how Pennsylvania fares in their reliance on local revenues for educational dollars. I've updated the slide for the 2020 year, which was revised on May 2022. So this shows where the state is as far as how much they fund, and it also shows the state's reliance on local for their revenues. Currently, Pennsylvania ranks 43rd out of 50 states for their donation of 38.5% in state revenues for education. We did make a top 10. It's our reliance on local.
Great.
Lovely.
Our reliance on local revenues. Pennsylvania ranks 5th for the reliance on local revenue for education dollars.
Curious, why are we fifth when we're higher than New York, which is first?
New York, I might not have,
55.4.
I might have missed making that change.
Okay, that's fine.
But
I'm
the
just curious.
percentage might be wrong. I'd have to go back and look at the
So
chart.
it could be number one then.
No, I probably mistyped.
That's fine. That's not a good
That
number one. I'm just saying.
percentage.
It's, yeah, okay.
And these are for like statewide, so Pennsylvania has 500 school districts.
Right.
Each with their own kind of calibration between local and state, but
Mhm.
statewide averaging.
This is
where
statewide
Pennsylvania
averaging.
comes in.
And just so you know, six of the top 10 states that rely on local dollars are on the East Coast here. New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Florida, Ohio, and Massachusetts.
If I could just interrupt for a second, that 38.5% state share, going back, I don't know, maybe 20 years, the state share was close to 50%.
Yes.
So when you hear folks making the argument that the state is underfunding, that's what they're talking about. And for districts that have a robust local tax base, it's not as significant as it is for districts that do not.
Correct. Absolutely.
So we're continuing to wait for a decision on the fair funding lawsuit that's been
Yes.
pending, but we have no idea when the judge will rule on that.
And
And
I
a
would
ruling
imagine
could
whichever
trigger-
side that comes out on,
They're
we're
gonna
gonna be in the
appeal.
courts
Be in
for quite a
appeal,
while.
Mm-hmm.
I should point out that in 2014, Pennsylvania was 46th, so we've improved a little. And we were 4th, so we've improved a little in our numbers. But it still continues. In addition to that, and this is more looking at it from the standpoint of Haverford, when we look at our local resources, your tax base is broken out into residential and other areas like commercial properties and so on, land, lots, trailers, and so on. So I went and looked out on the state equalization board to see how does Haverford Township stand in the reliance on residential versus others. And we are second in the state in our reliance on the residential party.
In the whole state, not just
In
in
the whole
Delaware
state.
County?
This shows Delaware County,
Mhm.
but I took it a step farther and went and looked. Wallingford Swarthmore's number 1 in the state. We're number 2.
Wow.
Jim Thorpe up in Carbon County is number 3. South Park out near Pittsburgh is number 4.
Jim Thorpe really is number 3.
And that amazes me every
That
time
amazes-
because I come from that area.
Yeah, I've been
I'm-
there. I mean, that's like, it's all tourism and businesses.
I have a
thought.
feeling all of the residential homes that are now shops have not been reclassified to commercial,
Gotcha.
is my guess.
Because that would be.
That's my gut instinct
yeah,
on
there's
that
a lot
one.
of people who live there full-time. It's mostly, okay, that's
That's my
fascinating,
personal
though.
guess is the residential properties that have become commercial haven't been reclassified from residential.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
That's my guess, but I don't know that for a fact, but.
But yeah,
So-
I mean, that resonates if people think of, you know, Haverford Township, what they know, there's only those couple of commercial corridors on some key arteries, but yeah, it's largely a community of neighborhoods and homes.
Right.
Were we higher, were we even lower than that before the development of the Quarry Center? I mean, I don't know if that's going back too far for anybody's memory, that was
Quarry
like
Center
years ago,
over
but.
on- Yeah,
What's that?
the Coles and the Giant over there, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I-
Well, the Giant, the Lowe's and everything else, Kohl's was always there. But yeah, everything else was built after the quarry was filled in.
I don't have the historic numbers,
That's fine.
so I can't answer that question. I mean, I would assuming that property before it was developed was at least in it as land as opposed to residential. So like if the land was industrial or commercial or something like that, it would still not be listed as residential.
Gotcha.
So it's possible it wouldn't have shifted the percentages. Just to give you a look back, a reminder on what the budget is for this year, for the 22-23 budget, our local revenues make up over 81% of our budget. This includes property tax, transfer tax, interest earnings, facility rentals, and other miscellaneous revenues. State revenues make up 18% of the budget. This is your basic ed subsidy, your special ed, transportation subsidies, what is called by the state rental sinking fund. It's the reimbursement through PlanCon for our debt. Social Security reimbursement, PSERS reimbursement, property tax reduction allocation, and things like that. So it's just over 18%. Our federal revenues, which is Title I, Title II, Title IV, make up about 1/2%.
So we have to jump through all those federal hoops for that little bit of money.
Yeah,
And do all this testing.
yes.
For less than $1 million.
Listen, about to say. That's less than the contingency left on Linwood, by the way, in case anybody is keeping score, it's.
Yeah,
you know.
now what's not included in the general fund federal revenues are things like the reimbursement we get for food service.
Okay.
That is not part of these numbers.
That's a separate budget.
It's a
there,
separate budgetary area, so it's not part of that number. When we did the budget, we didn't include any of the ESSER funding because they're one time, here's the money, spend it, and now it's gone. So we didn't include it in the budget. And IDEA is actually, because IDEA funds are passed through the IU, they're in local funds. They're not in
Okay.
federal
That's
funds.
interesting.
Because it's the IU that gives it to us, not the federal government that gives it
How much,
to us.
I mean, how much is that, ballpark, if you
IDEA?
remember, yeah.
I'm not gonna do it off the top of my head.
That's fine, that's fine.
But
No, I'm just curious.
That's another one I know Larry can speak to about how the, you know, the promise of that program was to fund much more than the
Mhm.
federal
Yes, it
government
does.
has kept up with.
Mhm.
Yeah, they were gonna fund 40% of the excess cost of providing those services, and it's never been higher than about 17 or 18%.
Yeah,
Wow.
the federal/state special ed reimbursement is nowhere near what we expend in special ed, and this is in no way saying special ed doesn't deserve to get the services they need to get. It is instead saying that the laws aren't supporting those
Right.
mandatory costs. It's just it is a burden that is appropriate, but
And the
It's our
state,
local responsibility.
the state budget line for special ed was flat, I think, for 6 years running.
Yes.
The last couple of years, it's ticked up some, but
a little bit.
prior to that, there was no increase for 6 years.
I can't imagine our costs stayed flat for 6 years.
No, they did not.
In the state category, you mentioned the PSERS, right, so the state reimburses us or shares 50% of that cost, so
Correct.
it's a little bit of a wash, right? Like,
Well,
it's
currently,
revenue, but
our
it's 'cause we
current
have
rate
spent-
for this year is 35.26%. So every dollar that we pay out in salaries, there's an additional 35 cents that is paid out in retirement for the PSERS program. The state then gives us half of that 35 cents.
Back.
And just
So-
for context, when I came on the board in 1999, the PSERS increase was 0.
Well, that's the unfortunate thing when they do those at that point. But, the next slide I was going to go to was PSERS, so this is a great
Oh,
introduction.
good.
First thing I want to say when I talk about PSERS, because I get on a soapbox over this, is the school district doesn't set PSERS. We have nothing to do with how the pension plan is created, how the pension plan is allocated, and how the pension plan is paid for, because trust me, every business manager in the state, back when they cut the rates, would have paid in. Because I was one of those business managers back then, and I was literally begging, can I please send in 7%? And they wouldn't allow it. And if you did send it in, they sent it back. So,
So there is some question on the financial management of PSERS.
so in 2009-10, the PSERS rate was a 4.78, and it cost the district $2 million gross, $1 million after the state has funded half of it. As you roll forward, when you get to 2009, when you get up from 2009-10, you can see that just a couple of years later, it gets up to 8.65 and rapidly grows after that, so that it gets up for this year at the 35.26%. And it's costing the district $22 million, which the state reimburses half, so it's net $11 million, which is a very significant change from the original position we started at. So I want to point out for next year, for 23-24, one time only, and the first time in a very long time, PSERS is actually reducing our PSERS rate from 35.26 to 34, which is a wonderful thing. And I'm not going to complain, except for the fact that when I compare the projections of a year ago, when it was at 35.26, to the projections that are now coming out of the 34, our PSERS rate is actually going to get higher 5 years out than it was originally projected from a year ago. So yes, they're doing something nice in the coming year, but we're going to pay for it.
And it's still 34 cents on every dollar
34 cents of every dollar.
that we have no discretion over.
Yeah, so that when you get out to 31, the rate that was originally projected was 37.3. The rate now is being projected at 38.35.
5 years
So,
from now?
as I said, it's wonderful to get the 34, but we're going to pay for it. So the numbers just go right back up. Pension, as you can see, is one of the largest drivers of expenses to the district when it comes to, this is something we don't have control over. The state sets everything and how it has to be paid. Back in 17-18, they redid the PSERS law and adjusted the way PSERS is being done, and it's supposed to save us money. And what they've said back then, and this is still holding true, is that we will see a decrease in our rates, a routine decrease in our rates, about 2034, 35. So it'd be 2034, 35
You and me both.
to up to 2050 is when we should see the rates start dropping back down. I don't think I'm gonna care, but.
You retire, yeah.
Well, maybe I will, because I'll be collecting by then. But, yeah, so the change in the law is not going to provide us with a decrease in our pension rates anytime soon. But again, not looking a gift horse in the mouth, next year, we are seeing a drop. And it's a wonderful thing, because it will reduce some cost in the 1 year.
And the good news is that it's growing at a much lower rate.
It's slowed down. It's definitely slowed down.
Because it was like almost, it was growing by 50% and 40% and 30%. Now it's growing by like, 2,
Well, yeah.
3%, but it's still growing.
Yeah, except for next year.
That's next year, 1 year drop.
Just to give you an understanding of what the PSERS rate is, when you look at the PSERS rate, there is a piece that's called the normal cost rate. That's the actual pension rate that is normal for the employer. That's about 5.86 for the coming year. In addition to that, there is an Act 1 contribution rate. That's the bill that was passed a couple of years back. There's an additional cost of that act, so that's another 0.27% that is being added to our rate. And then there is a piece for healthcare contribution, which is 0.64%. So the employer rate is 6.77%. The rest of the 34% is that unfunded pension liability that was created when they dropped the rates to nothing many years ago. So 27.23% of the 34% is catch-up money.
Some of that liability also, I believe it was about 2008. I'm not positive there, but the stock market was going gangbusters, and the state legislature decided to give themselves a pension increase.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to get support to pass that bill, they extended it to all state employees and all school district employees. And it was a huge increase in benefits, and that's a big chunk of the unfunded pension liability.
They increased the benefits and they decreased the percentage that we were contributing, basically almost at the same time.
And there was a quote, I forget who it was, on the House floor, said, "This isn't going to cost us a thing."
Oh, it's nice
Yeah.
when you can just say that.
27%.
So I'll get off my soapbox, but this is one of our big cost drivers is the pension. And I am grateful for next year's rate being lower, but we will pay for that rate being lower in future budgets. Looking at the 22-23 expenditure budget, approximately 75% of our budget is salaries and benefits. We are a service organization. PSERS is included in the benefits number. Then we have about 12%, just under 12% for purchase services. These are things like therapists, consultants, legal counsel, contractors, tuition to specialized schools, costs to the intermediate units, payments to the community college, repairs, leases like the copiers, and our insurance is all in purchase services. Debt service makes up about 10% of our budget. That is the principal and interest for our various bonds, as well as included in that number is also like professional membership fees and stuff like that, which is a very tiny piece of it. Supplies and equipment is just over 3% of the budget. This would be your textbooks, small equipment, utilities, instructional and non-instructional supplies, software, gas, oil, all of those kind of things. And our budgetary reserve that we put in for if we missed something or something breaks that needs to be repaired and we didn't think about it. That makes up less than, well, it's 0.5% of our budget is our budgetary reserve. When I went through that, everybody talks about the discretionary portion of the budget. The only discretionary portion of the budget is your supplies and equipment. But inside that supplies and equipment is also included things like your utilities, your phone service, your internet, gas, diesel, propane, kind of need those things. Your crossing guards, your insurance is all in that area. So if I funnel it down, I end up with about $8 million out of the $138 million that can be considered discretionary. But if that $8 million is technology supplies, textbooks, paper, general supplies, custodial and maintenance supplies, technology equipment, transportation repairs. Don't really want to maintain those new buses, do we? Building repairs and things like that. So to say it's discretionary is actually not really true, because you do need textbooks and you do need to have technology today. And so there's a very, very, very small piece that could be considered discretionary. When you look at other people, when other school districts that are, their buildings are in need of, sore need of repairs, it's because they're taking that discretionary money out of their building repairs and waiting. So to say we have discretionary funds in a budget, you have to really look at what that is.
Again, if I could interrupt you, Martha, we go through this budget process for 10 months of the year. And according to, if I remember correctly, there's going to be 6 or 7 other opportunities to go through it
Right.
before we have to vote
Correct.
by June 30th. So the public has a great many opportunities to ask questions, to review the information. Once the budget's passed, it's posted on our website, it's public information. Our check registers are public information. And the reason I'm mentioning these things is that there continues to be a strong push for school choice options. And I just want to point out that we don't get any information from charter schools, and we don't get any information from schools that participate in the tax credit programs, which at this point I think is several $100 million goes into the tax credit programs, which means that it never makes it into the general fund and doesn't go to school districts. Right. So it just kind of astounds me that there's no accountability, no fiscal accountability for these school choice options. We just pay bills.
According to a budget that goes through this process and is vetted and reviewed in public. Mhm.
So if it's public education, then the public should be transparent to the public, which I believe this is quite a bit transparent.
We try to provide the information.
Thank you.
As we pull our expenditure budget together, for salaries, we work with the Human Resource Department and the current employment agreements. And we also meet with the various building principals and other areas to make sure we're accommodating for enrollment needs and things like that. So when it comes to salaries, we're looking at a lot of different areas to make sure we have the salaries accurate. Benefits, we belong to the Delaware County Healthcare Trust, and they provide us with a first look, and then they provide us with a final look later. So that our premium projections are based off of the consortium to give us better buying power for that. And also in the benefits is that new PSERS rate. For purchase services, supplies, and equipment, we obviously are contacting the building principals, the various managers of the various areas like operations and transportation to make sure everybody has their input into their areas of need. Debt service is pretty set, except for the fact that we're going to be doing debt service soon. And the budgetary reserve, we leave pretty constant, and if we don't need to touch it, we don't, and it doesn't get used. But as I said before, it's approximately 0.5% of our budget at the $800,000. And Larry commented on what's next. Well, normally we get a governor's budget. Our governor hasn't even been sworn in yet, so I don't think he's got a budget ready for some strange reason. So we don't have the date for when that will be. We will be, for the next board meeting, put the Act 1 index resolution on for your consideration.
That's the not to exceed the
Not to exceed 4.1. And after that, there's obviously every finance committee meeting will have something. And then when you get into May is when you'll be taking action on the preliminary budget. And in June is when you approve the final budget. Any questions?
Any questions? I was gonna reiterate that, I appreciate you laying this out, giving us the process, some of the key components of the budget. Approving a budget is one of the key responsibilities of the school board and, of the district to manage to that budget. As you pointed out, our district is largely 80% locally funded, so we, we take that role and responsibility seriously to be stewards of the community's tax dollars and the resources of this district. So it does help to have this plan and to see what's next and all the thought and the work that goes into compiling the budget. One suggestion, and I know I've made this before, but these are big dollar amounts, $138 million, and we operate a large system, a school system here. So at one of these many future presentations, I do think another way of presenting the information that's helpful for board members and the community to understand is to, where possible, translate some of these dollars into what that means on a per student basis, or dollars per square foot for our schools, or dollars per building, or trying to make some of these expenditures tangible where possible, and to understand. And you mentioned like the supplies and equipment being a somewhat discretionary component of the budget, and that though does comprise the stuff that people think of when they think of the school, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the materials, the equipment, the curriculum, like a lot of that is in that. So where we have those opportunities to translate these concepts that are big dollar amounts and kind of regulated, mandated, prescribed by different sources, to try to make the connection to how that appears in our classroom and how our students experience the budget, I think is something we should try to do, just to make the budget a little more of a living, understanding kind of resource and tool for the district and the community.
Especially too, since our enrollment is growing, right? Like comparing our budget to our enrollment as we're seeing all of this enrollment growth. I
And
think
that is
it's useful, yeah.
Right,
I
and
think
it is a justification for why,
Yeah.
why it costs more each year to run our district. There's more students, and I think more staff to support those students. Inflation is a concept everybody's familiar with, and we're not, despite some of the beneficial purchasing power that we have, we're not certainly immune to inflationary pressures. And yeah, I think there's there's those opportunities just to try to make the budget a little more relatable.
Anything else?
Any other comments or questions about the budget or process? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One more comment. Jamie
Why don't you
from-
stay there by the microphone?
One more comment. Jamie from PFM contacted me today. He's been tracking, obviously, the market. They've managed to settle some bond sales. He said 4 or 5 for school districts around the state. He's going to be here at next month's meeting to discuss the bonds that we need to do to finish out Coopertown and Chatham Park. But he also wanted me to make you aware that he believes that we should refinance the swap as well. And so when he comes a month from now, he wants to discuss that refinancing as well, because he thinks the market's favorable to finally do that.
Okay, he had previewed that concept the last time
Yeah.
he was here a month ago, so nice that he's monitoring the markets for us, as always.
Right. That's everything.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
All right. So that concludes the 2 agenda items, and the next portion of our agenda is a time for public comment. Does anybody in the audience have? Okay, you can come to the podium. Please state your name and confirm your residency in the township, and the floor is yours.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Steve Westhoff. I'm a resident of the township. I'll try to tie this into the 2 agenda items you had. I'll start 2035. Pension costs will be reduced, hopefully. My younger child will be graduating from Haverford High School, I believe. And President Biden has set a goal to have 100% carbon pollution-free power in America. I'll tie it into the other item. I got a chuckle out of the term, I think it means heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, but the term climate control. I'll run with that. I am hoping that Haverford Township, the school district, the township, and other local governments will take action to affect climate control, to try to reduce the warming that is at this point inevitable, and to do what we can on the ground while we have an opportunity to take action on these things. As we plan for the future, I mean, this is mostly a comment on having appreciated watching some of the discussions about the feasibility study that have happened. I really appreciate that the district has taken the time to look into solar. I heard mentioning of energy efficiency and a lot of interest, though not necessarily enough details yet, on how to take advantage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act funds that should be made available. Additionally, grants and other public financing that might be available. So we haven't seen a study in print yet. I hope that there's going to continue to be more detail made available to the public. And that I hope that we have more than a couple days to review that document before the board discusses or acts on it. The slides have been helpful, the discussion has been helpful, but I think that I'd certainly love to comment, and I'm hoping others in the community, maybe students, maybe others, would be interested in learning some of those details. You know, I'm focused on climate tonight, but I think when you're looking at how to not just fit people into buildings, but facilitate a full education in your school sites, I think that's really important. And the diagrams that, from what I saw, were very helpful and interesting, and you can see the future of, you know, the next 10 plus years. In addition to making that study public, I'd really love for you to dig in on the funding and public financing options, to engage the Pennsylvania school boards and districts on how they're handling this. There are Pennsylvania districts that have not just gone with like a less fossil fuel polluting option, but have gone like fully electric school buses, etc. And I'm certainly not suggesting that we increase taxes, quite the opposite. I think in some options, if you look at not just replacing what we have with something that's slightly better, but with something that is much better, electric if possible, that may ultimately save money as well. I also think that it is a great opportunity to not only improve indoor and outdoor air quality. Natural gas has more and more documented issues. It's also an opportunity to inspire and educate students. In a couple weeks, my daughter, who's a third grader at Coopertown, she's going to be joining the Eco Action Club. And I'm here in part because I had some really good teachers who made me concerned about these issues and felt like I could do something. I wish I had done more when I was there. I'm here in part because we don't have another generation or another decade to take action here. And individual choices, recycling, that's really, that's great. And I think that's a great start, but it's not going to address the urgency and the crisis that we will be facing as the climate continues to warm. So again, I think this is a way to save money, to educate, and to do our part at the local level to implement what is a global problem. Thank you.
You made reference to the facility study. I can say that that's a report that we're still expecting to get. It's supposed to be finalized this month. And we'll also say there will be many points at which we will be discussing prioritization of some of the recommendations, time frame, schedule, financing of that. That's going to lay out a whole scope of work and planning that the district undertakes once we have that report to review.
I can tell you, one thing that we are looking at, one of the reasons why we actually were getting set up to try to get solar, at least on one building as of last year. And then the IRA passed. And suddenly the funding sources became much better, quite frankly, much more varied. And right now, from what we understand, a lot of the grants for how that money will be dispersed are still being worked out. The EPA has never had this much money to put out there for these kinds of, for solar, for energy efficiency, for efficiency. So we're ready. It's a matter of actually getting, figuring out what is the best options for us. I believe they've released one grant round since the IRA passed. It was a strange one. It was for, I think, 30 schools across the country, and it just didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But there are going to be a lot more coming out, and we're well positioned. We have 2 schools that have new roofs, and we want that certainly to be a start. Speaking at least for myself, I definitely want that to be a start.
Is there anyone else who'd like to make public comment tonight? No?
Either of you?
Hearing none? Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Hearing none, then the business of the committee is concluded. We're adjourned. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.